Good evening, I'm Jane Manley, and thank you for having us tonight. Before I begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the League of Women Voters, and I'm reading the script because we have to be consistent, so bear with me. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920. In 1920, when women first gained the right to vote. Its purpose then was very much like it is today, to promote active, informed citizen participation at all levels of government through education and advocacy for men and women of all ages. The League has two separate and distinct roles, voter service and action advocacy. In both roles, we are a nonpartisan organization. That means the League never supports or opposes any political party or candidate, nor do we ever deliberately shape our education or advocacy on issues to benefit a political party. The League does, however, take position on issues, but only after carefully studying an issue and coming to consensus. You may see that the League has taken positions on some of the November ballot measures. However, that's not the purpose of our presentation today. This presentation is part of our voter service program, and we will present the information in a fair, unbiased manner. If you want to know the positions, you may visit the state website, which is LWVCalifornia.org. You can Google it, you'll find it. Because the League of California has taken some positions, and we have some information to that. Our being here today is part of our voter service activities, as I said. We'll give you facts about the ballot measures and the statements that the supporters and opponents are making about the propositions. These statements do not represent the League or the Legislative Analyst Office. After hearing this information, you'll make your own decision about the measures. The League is a grassroots organization. All citizens of voting age, men and women, are welcome to join. We can tell you more about that after the meeting. Our goal today is to provide information about the pros and cons. We're providing, as I said, unbiased, nonpartisan explanation of the state ballot measures to create an understanding of the issues, the context that the issue comes up in, and the arguments for and against, so you can make an informed decision. So the guidelines we use to evaluate what ballot measure are ones we recommend to you. Look at what the measure is trying to do. Do you agree with the goals of the measure? Was the measure placed on the ballot by the legislature or by a petition signature process? Who are the real sponsors and opponents of the measure, and check to see where the money is coming from? Does the measure create its own revenue source? Big, important thing in our budget times. Does it earmark or restrict or obligate government revenues? And if so, you have to weigh the benefit of securing funding for the measure against the cost of reducing the overall flexibility of the budget. Does the mandate measure a government program but without doesn't address how to pay for it? And if it changes the Constitution, does it really belong there in your opinion? And you need to be wary of distortion tactics and commercials that rely on image that tell nothing of substance. And on the next page, we have some examples of a few things that what we call misinformation and disinformation. You want to know, are the sources credible? You want to know if they're not, if you're not sure, look for other sources and what are they saying about the measure? What are fact checkers saying? And is the investigation a neutral one? Watch out for deep fakes or videos, and anything that evokes a strong emotional reaction is usually trying to grab you in some way. You watch out for that. So what we use are these reliable and trusted sources. The Legislative Analyst Office, an organization called Ballotpedia, our own League, of course, and the and Cal Matters, which is an excellent website for basic information. So let's discuss the ballot measures. There are 10 this year on the ballot, and it's a general rule of thumb. Yes means you want to change something or that you favor what's being proposed. No means you want to keep things the way they are, or at least you don't favor the particular change that's being proposed. And please write down questions as we move along, and we'll take them all at the end because we have a lot to cover with you tonight, and we can do questions if you need. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague and friend, Jenny Sweeney, to talk to you about the first set of propositions.
Good evening. Thanks for showing up tonight. I'm glad the 49ers are in. All right. So thank you, Jane. Before I discuss two of the bond measures that are on the ballot, let's review what a bond measure is intended to accomplish. Bond measures are put before the voters as a means of obtaining financing for various purposes, such as huge capital projects involving infrastructure that will serve the public over many generations. If approved by voters, the state sells the bonds to investors, agreeing to pay off the bond with interest, typically over a 30-year period. The state services these bonds before paying for any of the other obligated funds out of the general fund. Cal Matters, the nonpartisan news organization, estimates that a $15 billion bond would cost each Californian about $20 a year for the term of the bond. All right, let's go to Proposition 2. So Proposition 2 is a bond measure. It asks the voters, should the state authorize $10 billion in bonds to build new or renovate existing public school and community college facilities? So why is this proposition on the ballot? I think we can all agree that school facilities are in need of repair or modernization. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, 38% of our students attend schools that don't meet the state's minimum safety standards. Research has shown that students who attend school in substandard facilities tend to have lower attendance rates, lower morale, and lower achievement. Californians last approved a bond measure to fund public education facilities in 2016. This issued $9 billion in bonds to fund improvement and construction of school facilities K-12 and community colleges. For public school districts, the state usually pays 50% of new construction and 60% of renovation projects, with the school district expected to cover the remaining expenses. The state also often shares half the cost of new construction and renovation projects with community college districts, expecting them to cover the remaining fees and costs. So what would this proposal do? If passed, Prop 2 would provide $8.5 billion for projects at K-12 schools and $1.5 billion for projects at community colleges. Prop 2 also includes language that the state will assume a higher percentage to fund projects for school districts that serve low-income students. What are the fiscal effects of the proposition? It is estimated that it will cost $500 million to 35 years to repay the bonds. These payments would be made from the general fund, which is used to fund most public services. Supporters and opponents. So these views that are presented are not the views of the league or the Legislative Analyst Office, but they're there as mainly a reference point. When you look inside your voter guide that you received from the state, you will see a much more extensive list of supporters and opponents and who the groups are. So please be sure to check that out. Okay, let's go to Proposition 4. Proposition 4 is asking a question. Should the voters let the state sell $10 billion in bonds for various projects to reduce climate risks and impacts? So why is this on the ballot? Over the past decade, the state has spent an average of about $13 billion a year on natural resource and climate activities. And about 15% of that funding has come from bonds. Government agencies work directly to fund natural resource and climate projects. And the state also provides funds or grants to local governments, nonprofits, and businesses for these activities. In 2022, Governor Newsom announced plans to invest $54 billion from the state's general fund into the California Climate Commitment, a group of initiatives designed to prevent wildfires, protect water resources, and fund clean energy technology. However, with the projected state deficit, this cut that funding $9.4 billion. So what would this proposition do? If passed, Prop 4 would authorize $10 billion in funding for these projects. It is estimated it would cost $400 million a year over 40 years to repay the bond. The bond prioritizes lower income communities and those most vulnerable to climate change and requires annual audits. What are the fiscal effects of the proposition? Repaying the money could cost $400 million a year over 40 years, a legislative analyst says, meaning taxpayers could spend $16 billion. Once again, the opinions of the supporters and the opponents of the bill are not the view of the League or the legislative analyst office, but representative of the groups who support and oppose this proposition. I'll turn it over to Jane for her presentation on the proposed constitutional amendments.
Thank you. All right, there are 3 constitutional amendments on the ballot in the form of propositions. They were all placed there by the legislature. And the first one is called the constitutional right to marriage. And the question is, should the Constitution be amended to define marriage as a fundamental right for all, regardless of sex or race, and remove the language that states that marriage is only between a man and a woman? So why is this on the ballot? Because the Constitution says right now that marriage is only between a man and a woman. That's the only legal definition of marriage in our Constitution. And the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that it's unconstitutional to outlaw same-sex marriages, and that same-sex couples must be treated the same as opposite-sex couples. And indeed, in California, same-sex marriages have been performed for a number of years. So the goal of the amendment is to take the language out that says just a man and woman, because under the law, we really are allowing for same-sex marriages. There will be no fiscal effects from this change, and the supporters say that it makes sense because the Constitution should affirm marriage equality because that's the law of the United States. And opponents say that same-sex marriage is already legal, so there's no need to change the Constitution, and it opens the door to alternative kinds of marriages. Proposition 5 changes the way that bonds are approved to pay for affordable housing and infrastructure projects. So the question is, should local bond measures to fund housing bonds for low and middle income Californians and public infrastructure projects be allowed to pass with a 55% voter approval instead of the 66.7% approval currently required, which is called the supermajority approval? The 55% would be a simple majority approval. So why is this on the ballot? Because the legislature wants to change the laws to get rid of the supermajority needed and allow for a simple majority needed to pass local bond measures. Because affordable housing is an issue across our state, and this will allow local government, local communities to make their own decisions and build more affordable housing. So the proposal will lower that voting requirement so that we can pass bonds with a simple majority. And then don't expect to have an effect on the state budget, but it will affect local, because if we pass local bond measures, we'll be paying those bonds through our property taxes. Supporters say it gives local communities more tools to make housing affordable. And the opponents think that it causes more high debt. All right, Proposition 6. This one eliminates a constitutional provision that allows for involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons. I bet you didn't know that was in our Constitution. So the question is, should the Constitution be amended to remove a provision that says that involuntary servitude can be used as a punishment for a crime? Or And also to prohibit punishment for refusing work assignment and allow voluntary work assignments in exchange for credit to reduce sentences. So working would be a way for an incarcerated person to earn credits for good behavior and maybe change their sentence rather than a job. So the situation is that the Constitution prohibits forced labor, but it has this other language about, except if you're incarcerated and you get a work assignment and you do it, you can be punished or maybe have a job, which is forced labor. So it amend the Constitution to prevent involuntary servitude for any reason and take away the disciplining people for refusing a work assignment, and they are not sure about what the cost could possibly be. The supporters believe this will restore human dignity by ending forced labor, which they say constitutes slavery, and focus instead on rehabilitation for incarcerated persons, and no one submitted any argument against the proposition. So now we will move on to Amy.
Yes.
We'll talk about the items that were placed on the ballot by petitions.
Good evening, everyone. Okay. My first reaction as I hear us talking is I'm gonna go slow on my ballot, take my time, and probably drink wine simultaneously. It's just a lot. Sorry, that's me editorializing, but I felt like it's in the spirit of what we're actually tackling. Okay, Proposition 32. Ms. Jane, are you good to help
I am.
slide advancing?
Yeah.
All right. So Proposition 32 is an initiative that would raise the state's minimum wage. So currently, the question being asked is, should California raise its statewide minimum wage to $18 an hour by January 1st, 2026, and then each year based on inflation? So the proposition would specifically take minimum wage, which currently stands at $16 an hour for most employment categories. We do have some categories of employees in California that have higher minimum wages, for instance, fast food workers. We also have certain cities and counties that have higher minimum wages than the state's base, which is 16, which is also allowed under law. And this does not change those who are in excess of 18. This doesn't affect them, okay? So what this would do if Proposition 32 passes is that we would see a stair-stepped increase based on the size of a business. If you have 26 or more employees, effective January 1st of 2025, you would go from $16 an hour right now directly to 18. The state views 26 as the litmus for being a quote larger employer. If you are an employer with 25 or fewer employees, then you have a 2-year stair step. January 1st of 2025, you would go to $17 an hour. And then January 1st of 2026, you would move to $18 an hour. So for larger employers, it's immediate in 3 months. For smaller employers, you get 2 years to stair step to the increase. The other component of the proposition is that after January 1st of 2026, minimum wage would then increase by the rate of inflation or 3.5%, whichever is greater. I want to make clear that is already the law. That's already in effect. This just continues that practice. So again, if inflation is what it's been lately, it would increase at 3.5%. If inflation is less than 3.5%, that would be the rate that minimum wage increases. So understand 17, 18, and then it's 18 times 3.5% in 2027. Don't ask me to do that math, it's been a long day. And then that amount by 3.5% again in 2028. So minimum wage will continue to increase. This is now shifting what that base is, okay? All right, fiscal effects, the legislative analyst's office go either way, right? Are employers gonna raise their prices to cover the cost difference of what they now need to pay for this minimum wage increase? Are we gonna see a reduction in tax revenue because of businesses are making less profit and the profit is what is taxed? Trade-off, does the state now have to provide less services to individuals who are now making more money and no longer need to rely on state services for healthcare, for other support programs? So there's a variety of, it could go this way or it could go that way, depending upon which side of this question you're looking at. There will be fiscal impact. The extent of that varies, frankly, depending upon who you're asking. Supporters and opponents. I'm so much more editorialized. These two ladies are so well behaved. I'm rogue agent. It's been a long day. I always love that the supporters and the opponents have now made names like, yes, on the California Living Wage Act, Californians against job losses and higher prices. To Jane's point earlier, you have to do your homework. Who is actually that yes group and who is actually that no group? Because supporters will tell you, we have a lot of people living below living wages here in California. It's an expensive state in which to live. So this helps in ensuring people that live here can afford to live here. Opponents say this is going to hurt businesses, particularly small businesses, which make up a large number of our businesses in California. So again, you have to decide, doing your own homework, doing your own research. Proposition 32, are we going to raise the minimum wage? All right, next. Proposition 33. Friends, there's some doozies in here. You're just going to go along with me. We all might nod together, pretend like we actually understand what the heck has been allowed on the ballot. The question: should the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995, which is a state law, be repealed so local governments can set rent regulations? Okay, so the world as we currently know it today, the situation is that currently in California, rent control is controlled by the state. Local governments cannot expand or limit rent control. Local government cannot get in the rent control game, as dictated by the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995. This proposition would repeal that and now empower local government to determine if rent control exists. It would also give local government the opportunity to expand the parameters around the type of rent control that's in place, because currently there's limits on percentage of rent increases, and there's also limits based on when a piece of property was built and the type of property it is, single housing versus multi-unit dwellings. This would remove those parameters around year built, single unit versus multi-unit, and put all of that power into cities and counties' hands. Okay, so what's the fiscal effect? Big, gigantic question mark, because it will all depend on if cities and counties choose to take up their right to now exercise greater or lesser rent control than a bare minimum that the state has set. So we won't know what happens to property tax revenue, which is driven in part by what, you know, are landowners going to, or homeowners going to continue to own their homes? Are they going to sell them because they don't want to deal with rent control? If they sell them, what changes in property tax? Like it's this cascading effect where the legislative analyst's office has said, we don't know what the effects of this are going to be financially, because we don't have a sense how many cities are going to raise their hands and say, we want to now institute our own type of rent control, or how many of them are going to say, not touching it with a 10-foot pole, we're going to let it run, right? Okay, so supporters, they kept it simple. Their website is yes on 33 and the opponents are no on 33. I appreciate none of the games and the names. So the supporters say local governments, they know their communities, they know what their housing needs are, they know what level of housing crisis they have. Local control is better. And it allows for it allows for unique customized solutions to unique customized problems, right? City councils and county boards of supervisors, they know better than that group up in Sacramento. That's what the supporters are saying. The opponents are worried that it's going to increase housing costs and that ultimately homeowners and renter protections that already exist could actually go away as a result of these changes. Because now cities and counties, I mean, the rules are pretty finite right now. We're opening up that opportunity that cities and counties can get very restrictive, or they could all bets are off, right? And so those opponents want us to think about the potential effects to disrupting that housing market and the potential issues in terms of home values and what that does for revenue as well, right? Because remember, we are highly dependent upon property tax revenue. And so their argument is some guys are gonna be like, I'm getting out of owning a rental house. This is just too crazy now. So, by the way, my own question is what happens if a city and a county don't agree? Like cities within a county, then what? Like, does the county trump the city? Does the city, that is not clear to me. And from all of my research, that question hasn't been answered, which frankly, folks, is often the case. We have lots of thoughtful questions and they don't speak to it in the information. All right. Prop 34. All right, here is the question. Should certain healthcare providers be required to spend 98% of their revenues from a federal discount prescription drug program on direct patient care? Okay. And should the state be permanently authorized to negotiate Medi-Cal drug prices? So here's an important thing, because this is actually asking you to make two decisions with one vote. All right. The other thing that I find fascinating is this is about one company specifically. So we have a ballot proposition about one individual company, which speaks to one of those questions, and then broader issue that speaks to the second question. All right. So we use Medi-Cal RX as our prescription program through Medi-Cal, which is our state program for low-income individuals, okay, health insurance for low-income individuals. The first part of this question that Proposition 34 is proposing is that it would prevent how healthcare providers restrict spending their revenue, having benefited from being a vendor within this program. So this is specifically about an organization called the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And the assertion is that this business has benefited from participating as a vendor in this program. And as such, we need to prevent businesses who are benefiting from essentially a drug discount option. We need to prevent them from spending their profits on things other than the patients that their organization is meant to benefit. You with me? Right. I'm glad you are. There's not, I had to read this one 3 times. So if you are a healthcare provider that participates in Medi-Cal RX, you will be restricted. They may be restricted if they spend over $1 million in any 10 years on things outside of patient care. All these conditions have to be true. They own and operate multifamily housing units with at least 500 serious healthcare violations in their properties. We got real specific. Okay. And it would now mandate that they have to spend at least 98% of their net revenue earned in California on healthcare services provided directly to patients. That's part 1 of what the bill would mandate. Then part 2 is creating penalties, for specific penalties that would apply if you violate these provisions. Okay. Supporters say it will drastically cut costs of prescription drugs for Medi-Cal patients. it will absolutely require abusers of the new rules to provide healthcare to low-income patients. And it's, we're very specific on what we're going with here, right? 98% of your revenue has to be spent on low-income patients. The opponents say we are literally abusing the proposition process by writing a ballot initiative that targets a single individual company, and that is not what the proposition process is supposed to be about. So, like I said, glass of wine with a ballot. Okay. Proposition 35. Should California make permanent an existing tax on managed healthcare plans to provide ongoing funding for Medi-Cal and other healthcare services? Okay, so what's our situation? So currently, the state imposes a tax on healthcare plans. And it's a law that gets passed, but it's got a sunset clause, and we hear it, we pass it, we do it again in a couple of years, right? So the last time this law was passed was in 2023. It expires in 2026. What this does is take us out of the loop of we like it, we pass it, we come back in 5 years. We like it, we pass it, we come back in 5 years. And this just codifies it and says, we're making permanent the tax on managed healthcare plans, okay? It is subject to federal approval because what we do with the revenues from this tax, we use it to match funding we get from the feds to then help pay for Medi-Cal. Okay, so the people of the state of California are going to say, yep, no, we want to get out of this cycle of we pass it and we come back to it, we pass it and we come back to it. We want to make it permanent. The feds then have to sign off on us making it permanent. So I want folks to understand that the people in the will of California might be yes, and the federal government might say no. So just know that that's a component in this. It also would ensure that we cannot, monkey fart around with what goes on in the general fund like has happened in the past. That was one of the things that Jane was talking about when she asked you to think about what this changes. It prohibits the use of these monies. We can't take this money and now go use it for something else. We've said it's to ensure we have consistent funding for Medi-Cal. That's what it has to be used for, okay? Yes, there will be a fiscal effect. In the short term, not a lot of changes, but starting in 2027, the Legislative Analyst's Office says it could see an additional bump between $2 billion and $5 billion annually in funding for Medi-Cal. It will also then increase the state's costs between $1 billion and $2 billion in complement, because essentially things are going to get bigger. There's going to be, because we have a steady stream of funds, because we can't monkey with the funds, more money to be managed means more people time to manage the money, okay? What do the supporters say? They say this ensures that our low-income Californians who rely on this program, like we're not threatening to take it away because it doesn't get funded when something sunsets, right? This is stability and ensuring that this program is in place. It ensures we have a dedicated ongoing funding source, and it includes accountability measures around how the money is gathered, spent. We're locking it in place. This is one of the propositions that at the time this information was put together, it did not have any known opponents. I want to reiterate a comment Jane made earlier. Going to the Secretary of State's website, or even going, obviously we're biased, going to the League of Women Voters of California's website will help you see if any opponents have since gotten on a bandwagon or if groups have changed their mind, because that happens through the process. So I do want to encourage you to use digital resources to make sure you know the most current, who's in support and who's in opposition. Thanks, everyone.
All right, and to wrap up tonight is Proposition 36. So Proposition 36 allows felony charges and increased sentences for certain drug and theft crimes. So it asks the question, should California law allow people to be charged with felonies for possessing certain drugs and for thefts under $950 if the defendant has 2 prior drug or theft convictions? So why is this on the ballot? In 2014, voters passed Proposition 47, which changed some crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. For example, it reduced shoplifting, defined as stealing items worth $9.50 or less, from a felony charge to a misdemeanor, unless the accused person had prior convictions for serious crimes. Drug possession became a misdemeanor as well. Prop 47 also created the Safe Neighborhood and School Fund, which funneled savings from lower incarceration rates to mental health and drug treatment programs, programs to keep kids in school, and for victim services. One of Prop 47's purposes was to reduce overcrowding in state prisons that had been ruled unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2011. Since 2014, the prison population has decreased, and the money saved has been redirected toward the Safe Neighborhood and School Fund. However, since the implementation of Prop 47, there has been a marked increase in organized retail theft and smash and grab robberies, where groups of people break windows of a store or business, pull large amounts of items off the shelves, and run away. Although many people believe these robberies directly resulted from the decreased penalties enacted by Prop 47, there is no concrete evidence to suggest that the two are related. Shoplifting, however, has increased. It jumped 29% in 2022 and another 39% in 2023. So what would this proposition do? Proposition 36 would reclassify some misdemeanor theft and drug crimes as felonies. The measure would also create a new category of crime, a treatment mandated felony. People who don't contest the charges could complete drug treatment instead of going to prison. But if they don't finish the treatment, they still face up to 3 years in prison. What are the fiscal effects? Prop 36 would reduce funding for the social programs implemented by Prop 47 by $600 million. The LAO has determined that the increase in state criminal justice costs would range from several tens of millions to the low hundreds of millions of dollars each year. At the local level, Prop 36 would likely increase the number of people in county jails and under community supervision. Local courts, prosecutors, and public defenders would also see increased workloads due to the more complex felony cases. Overall, local criminal justice costs could rise by tens of millions of dollars each year. Proposition 36 would reduce the state savings created by Proposition 47, which are currently used for mental health and drug treatment, school programs, and victim services. This reduction could be in the low tens of millions of dollars annually. And once again, supporters and opponents are not the view of the league or the LAO. Thank you for your kind attention. We're very happy to be here tonight and share what we can about the propositions. We now have time for questions. Yes, ma'am.
On the league website, it says when you support which one you're neutral on, which one you're opposed. Would you feel free to do that tonight?
On the back table, we do have a flyer that states the league's positions. She wanted to know what the league's positions are on the propositions. Yes, and I replied that on the back counter, there's a handout that will tell you the league's positions.
Question about Proposition 2. Is it all of the schools and colleges, or only that 38% that was substandard that was going to be?
All of the schools would be eligible for the funding.
Okay.